Welcome back to Paris Lesbos. One of us is a pixie, the other gets called Rena. Today, our subject is a bit further in the past than the last two. You may be confused as I tend to try grouping people in twos or threes for short narrative arcs of this podcast, but alas, the route I want to take to a particular writer is proving more difficult to form a coherent narrative arc for. So, we return to the 1800s. This time to Italy and a rival of a great French actress of the era. Can you guess who I mean, Pixie?
Well, we've heard her name often enough when we talked about Sarah Bernhardt. Might it begin with an E?
It does. Eleonora Duse, as that is apparently how her last name is pronounced, according to the biographer Helen Shee. Oddly enough, it is French, and so I now feel the need to apologize for all the times I have mispronounced this woman's last name in the past. But she is the woman some have called the Italian Bernhardt.
And of course, some people have called Bernhardt the French Duse, so it evens out.
The daughter and granddaughter of actors, Eleonora Duse was born on October 3rd, 1858, in what was at the time the Kingdom of Sardinia, because Italy was not yet a nation. It would become a nation in 1861 and fully unify into the Kingdom of Italy in 1871.
So this was a different Italy than we're used to. Do we know anything about her childhood?
We know that she was the second child after an older brother who had been stillborn, so her parents adored her. By the time she was 4 years old, she herself had joined the traveling acting troupe that dealt with muddy ruts for roads with a constant worry about thieves and bug-infested beds in cheap rented rooms.
Ah, the glamorous life. But at least she got to be part of the excitement of the show.
Well, the acting part was no walk in the park. Even after her father held her hand and told her the words for the role, Eleonora had stage fright when playing Cosette in a production of Victor Hugo's Les Mis. The fear was probably not helped by another actor whacking her in the back of the legs to make her cry at the right part, even with her mother reminding her that it's only pretend.
Yeah, but getting whacked in the back of the legs wasn't pretend. And besides, I've heard that child actors do have this trouble of like distinguishing between like pretend and real life. So that just sounds like a miserable childhood.
I am not surprised. I do think small children probably really can't tell the difference. And it's probably why there's so many more regulations today about children and acting. So by now, you probably realized that they were poor. In fact, years later, Eleanor said she did not want any child going through what she did growing up, as she was frequently hungry, and meals could just be a piece of bread with a single piece of fruit. They couldn't even afford lamps for the rented rooms, which were left in darkness at sunset. This is on top of being the only child in the troupe as it traveled. Naturally, due to the traveling, she also didn't make friends with any children the group happened across. In fact, groups of children would stop playing and stare at her if she tried to join in. Things took a turn for the worse once Eleanor was 12 or 13. Her mother fell ill, possibly with cancer or tuberculosis. She was stuck going in and out of hospitals while the acting troupe merged with another group and restructured itself. After this, Eleanor was frequently the female lead cast opposite a new member from the second group, a young man about her age, probably a little bit older.
Oh, that's so incredibly young. I mean, that is a lot of responsibility and pressure for two like young teens.
It definitely was, and while Eleonora ended up learning on the job, she sometimes performed badly at first.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, she's like a 12-year-old. Gosh.
A 12-year-old with 8 years of acting experience.
Our mythical friend that all the job recruiters are looking for.
You read my mind. Also, Eleanor's acting was different for the time period. For instance, Sarah Bernhardt, who we covered a few years ago, was known to pause for up to 30 seconds in a pose before moving to the next one. This was not out of the ordinary. According to the biographer Helen Sheehy, there was a practice of actors studying paintings and statues in order to figure out the poses and movements of characters. So the people on stage didn't always move naturally like we're used to seeing today on stage or on screen. Acting back then was also more bombastic. You declaimed lines to an audience instead of just talking like no one's there or to other actors. These methods of acting also depended on nationality, region, and training, by the way. I'm being very broad here because entire books and dissertations have been written about the evolution of acting from the 19th century to the 20th, and we don't have time to fully dive into that here.
But the gist is that people were going for big stylized performances overall rather than realism.
So, against that backdrop, Eleonora avoided the typical acting style of the period in favor of a more naturalist style. She also adjusted her acting as she went based on what feedback she got from the audience. This created early success, which boosted her confidence. Never again did she suffer terrible bouts of stage fright. She was fully at home on the stage.
And she's what, 13 at this point?
By this point, she's only maybe 14. She is literally playing the role of Juliet in the actual city of Verona at the same age as the character in the play. However, in September of 1873, when she is still just 14, her mother dies alone in the hospital. Her father was not much help. He had always been more distant, and he withdrew even more. And humans being terrible, people questioned why Eleonora didn't sell everything she owned in order to afford the clothes for mourning. They reprimanded her for not crying enough in public, called her a heartless daughter, said they'd have sold themselves for mourning clothes if it had been their mother who'd died. She could only afford to wind a strip of black cloth round her neck instead. And then she fell into depression.
Really? Of course she did. Not only is her mother gone, she's also having to deal with this community shaming. Gosh.
It is also possible that Eleanor's mother was the one who held the troupe together as it disbanded in the wake of her death. In reaction, Eleonora moved from company to company in supporting roles on stage until 1878. Her insistence on her own way of acting rather than adhering to the typical method is in large part what led to constantly switching groups. Already, she had a large ego from being a leading lady as a teenager. That said, Eleonora did not go running around on her own during this time. Her father also went with her from group to group.
Was he also acting at this point, or was he just kind of looking after her, being a stage dad?
Oh, he's still an actor himself. It's in May 1878 that she gets her big break. The lead actress fell ill, so Eleonora took her role. During this time, an important theater critic saw her perform and predicted that the 19-year-old was destined for success on the stage. This was followed at the end of the year by a theater manager poaching her, the troupe that she left threatening to sue her for breach of contract, the settlement of that lawsuit, and the start of her performing in Alexandre Dumas' Fils work. So, the younger Alexandre Dumas.
Right, not the one who wrote The Three Musketeers. This is the one whose novel got adapted to La Traviata.
Yes.
Now, How is she doing in this? Is she able to handle the heat of a bigger production?
There is a critic who, in May, for instance, applauded her by saying her way of acting is the truest and most natural that can be imagined.
So people are liking it.
They are. She also got lucky because gaslighting was starting to catch on, and the increased illumination helped the audience to see the subtleties in her facial and body movements while performing. Now, for some reason during this time, she also decided to start a relationship with a man 20 years older than her with a receding hairline, bulging eyes, and a straggly mustache.
Is this like a money thing? Is it for the prestige of hanging out with him? Or the respectability of going steady rather than being an unattached lady of the theater?
No, Martino Caffiero was involved in Naples politics, festivals, and concerts. For some reason, he was also considered a ladies' man. Supposedly, according to the biographer Helen Sheehy, women liked his flattering and caressing manner. I am going to
Hmm.
assume this means he made them feel listened to and boosted their confidence in themselves.
Yeah, because that sounds creepy to me, but I guess it was something they liked at the time.
I mean, I think even in the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, there's a great deal about listen more than you talk because people will like you more and remember you more if they did the majority of the talking.
Hmm.
I think that plays a part into this.
He is making friends and influencing this talented actress.
So, just as she was achieving success, Eleonora found herself pregnant. Caffiero showed no sign he intended to marry her. In fact, he became aloof and cold, so she signed with another touring company alongside her father and hid the pregnancy.
What a great guy he turned out to be.
It gets worse. Despite her letters, Caffiero ignored her. Her father left briefly when he realized she was pregnant. However, he did not adhere to the common social custom of challenging the man who impregnated her to a duel in order to punish Caffiero for refusing to marry Eleonora.
I mean, I'm not sure that a marriage would be the best idea here, given the guy in question, but still, what gives?
For background, he was an old, weak man at 60 and broke, while Caffiero was rich with powerful friends. Her father did return to Eleonora after walking off in a rage. What I find surprising, though, in this scenario is it sounds like she managed to hide this pregnancy for 7 months.
Yeah, with a very public job.
I mean, there is a description, at least from the later months, of young men in the audience would give her knowing looks between looking at her belly and then looking back at her face.
So some people knew, but the public largely seems to have forgiven her.
I think, due to the nature of her job, it could be more easily hand waved away if anyone were to ask by saying props and costuming and other things,
Hmm.
especially depending on the play. Then, in June of 1880, a newspaper announced that she was ill and unable to perform. In reality, Eleonora gave birth to a boy, Mario. Now, according to the Italian law at the time, unwed mothers risked 5 years imprisonment and being publicly flogged if they kept their illegitimate children. The standard was for the child to be given to a foundling hospital without the father or mother listed. That didn't happen in this case because Mario died in infancy, by the sounds of it, before Eleanor could relinquish him. Caffiero had nothing to do with either Eleanor or the child during this. He considered her no better than a whore, actually, and Italian law protected men from paternity cases at this time, so there's really nothing to be done about him in this case.
Wow, love to see women in the arts get the respect they deserve. Gosh, this sounds like such an awful time in her life.
Yes, she is also only like 21, 22. The recovery itself took months, but a year later she was thinking of marrying a fellow actor in the company. By the spring of 1881, she married that actor, the 36-year-old Tebaldo, partly for the protection that marriage was supposed to provide her in the Italian legal system.
Yeah, it sounds like that was a really awful first pregnancy, so I wouldn't blame her for wanting to at least have some legal protection this time around.
That said, a woman could not control her own money unless she was over 21 and unwed. The next year, Eleonora had a daughter who lived and was sent to live with a wet nurse rather than be dragged all over Italy.
Ah, so she broke the cycle. Although, I don't know, sending her daughter away like that might be creating its own cycle.
Career wise, Eleonora was achieving some fame, and critics had begun to compare her to the French actress Sarah Bernhardt, though it would only be later that the press made it into a rivalry of the level of sports fans. By the end of 1883, Eleonora was sharing the troupe's directing and producing role with the group's leader. By 1885, the group sailed for a tour in South America. It is during this tour that she decided to separate from her husband. One biographer suggests it might be due to an affair on her part, though another biographer doubts that due to a lack of love letters or any other written evidence.
Yeah, what can you say without any evidence?
You can say a lot of things. Whether anyone believes you is a coin flip. There is also the possibility her husband slept with a teenaged actress during this time. Either way, he stayed behind in South America and she viewed him with apathy. But professionally, at least, the tour was a success. By the spring of 1886, the remainder of the group returned to Italy. On her return, Eleonora put her daughter into an expensive boarding school. The downside of wanting her daughter to have a better education and to fit into a higher social class with less effort was that the two never formed the sort of strong bond that Eleonora had enjoyed with her own mother. Admittedly, as the years passed, Eleonora would also struggle to separate her daughter from the ghost of her estranged husband. For herself, it was back to the steady whirl of theatrical tours. These were not just in Italy. One tour took her to Egypt. Another tour in Spain got cut short when the troupe had to flee from a cholera outbreak. By 1891, Eleonora was an international star with her own troupe. Success, though, was soon tinged with grief as her father died in 1893. She canceled performances for the 3 days after that. It's only a few months later that she finally takes a long vacation. Unfortunately, this is the moment Eleanor's estranged husband rears his head. He had moved to England to work at Argentina's consul and was threatening to take the money set aside for their daughter. That gets averted, thankfully.
How?
It isn't really documented. However, by the sounds of it, he goes back to not being a problem because not long after, with her next vacation, she meets a man we've encountered before and, to me, still very much resembles a gnome, the Italian poet D'Annunzio.
Our old friend. And he's like 20 years older than her, too?
No, he is about 5 years younger than her.
Wow. So she's breaking the pattern there.
Like clockwork, she ends up having an affair with him.
Like all of our other favorite ladies.
Not all of them. Romaine Brooks did not sleep with D'Annunzio.
And thank goodness for that.
Now, in 1894, Sarah Bernhardt saw Eleanor perform in the same role and same play that she herself had performed in. By this time, the two actresses were seen as rivals. Critics compared them, and to this day, the two are seen as opposite sides of the same coin. Where Bernhardt made sure to tilt her head back to project to the back of the theater, Eleonora somehow still captured the audience while turned aside as the character had a private moment. Thankfully for her, the play was so well known that everyone already knew what lines she was speaking. She also somehow had the ability to blush on command, so no stage makeup was required for that. However, prior to all this, Bernhardt had been someone Eleonora had looked up to. All that said, it is only in the late 1890s that she debuts in Paris, Bernhardt's home turf. Naturally, it was a success. However, when she tried out D'Annunzio's plays that he'd written for her, audiences didn't like them. This was to foreshadow her losing money by backing one of his projects at the turn of the century. A better collaboration would be The Time a few years later with the dancer Isadora Duncan and her lover Gordon Craig, where the opening night was packed.
Wow, didn't expect an Isadora Duncan cameo.
She actually pops up fairly frequently. However, by 1906, Eleanor wasn't touring as much. She had more time on her hands than she knew what to do with, for once. She ended up in an apartment in Rome for a time where she befriended the Italian writers Lina Poletti and Sibilla Alaramo. While Poletti and Alaramo had an affair, Helen Sheehy maintains that it is only speculation that Eleanor had an affair with either of them.
But maybe?
The only people who can tell us for certain are dead, and the dead always refuse to speak to me. Instead, Helen says Eleonora stopped having affairs after reaching menopause and that the admiration of female writers was a good ego boost, especially as Lena wanted to write plays for her. This only lasted until she realized Poletti had no talent.
So she was using her all along for her talented playwriting that never appeared.
That happens a bit more frequently than you would think, though it's not as if she would immediately drop you completely. She would just distance herself. So in this case, Eleonora left. Interestingly, Helen Sheehy does not comment on the possibility that Eleonora had an affair with Isadora Duncan, which some other people have suggested. But I suspect that remains to be seen considering our next episode.
I am all ears. I am so ready. Dish.
Instead, we go into World War I, and Eleanor is not having a good time. She had a bad case of the flu and severe depression. She was just not enjoying retirement since she left the stage in 1909. However, it is during this time that she discovers film. Still, she turned down D.W. Griffith's offer to come to LA to make movies. She didn't believe she had it in her to do well acting on screen, but Eleanor agreed when an Italian filmmaker asked her in 1916 because she felt a sort of confidence in him.
He's not one of those LA types who will sell you the moon or whatever. He's a nice, good Italian.
Her first and only film, which translates as Ashes, is about a mother who gives up her illegitimate child for his own good.
Oof, that sounds like that would hit close to home.
It does. Actually, a number of her plays are also of a similar subject, a woman with an illegitimate child. Sometimes it ends happily in marriage, sometimes in tragedy. So, art imitating life. Ashes failed commercially, with critics saying her acting was good and that the script was not. During the filming, Eleonora also took trips to visit soldiers in hospitals and to take letters back to their families. She turned down entertaining them as it seemed grotesque to do so when so many were dying in the mud.
Yeah, she's reading the room there.
Now, she did start on a second film. However, during location scouting, Eleonora got into a car accident and slammed into the windshield, which caused her to get several deep cuts in several places. The company took the chance to suspend filming after that. And then she caught Spanish flu at the end of the war, like so many others. Well, she survived, and then at 62, she decided she wanted to leave retirement and return to the stage.
Ah, so it didn't hit her too hard after all.
She began with short seasons in Italy, guest starring in other people's groups. Then she went on tour, including Broadway in the US in the early 1920s. It was during this time that she fell ill with the flu again in Pittsburgh.
Man, this flu will not stop.
Longing for her Italian doctors as she did not think the treatment she received was the best, Eleonora oscillated between delirium and lucidity. She was awake when she died on April 21st, 1924, at age 65. But the curtain didn't come down then. There was still the spectacle of her funeral. Her body laid in the chapel of the Church of St. Vincent Ferrer for 3 days. Every day from dawn to dusk, a steady crowd of people streamed by. On May 1st, there was a requiem mass of 20,000 people at 2 different locations just to hold them all. King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy sent a bouquet to cover her coffin. Unfortunately, Mussolini, who was active in Italy at the time, also sent a bouquet with the inscription, "To Italy's first daughter."
I'm still caught up on there being a king still.
There would be a king of Italy until abdication after World War II.
Just wild to think about.
Then Eleanor's corpse was transported from the U.S. to Naples, where a crowd of officials, reporters, and photographers greeted the ship as black smoke hung over Mount Vesuvius.
Wow, dramatic much?
For a woman who was born and died on tour, it's quite fitting.
Mm-hmm.
From there, her body was taken by train to Rome, where there was a funeral procession to a church owned by the Italian royal family. Tens of thousands of people lined the streets. Then, as per her wishes, Eleonora was buried in Asolo. Today, her rivalry with Sarah Bernhardt is well remembered. She is still a famous Italian actress, one who inspired others like Eva Le Gallienne, who got to meet her before she died. In 1947, people made a film about her, and there is supposedly a new one being made as well. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but it might have already appeared in the 2024 Cannes Film Festival. All in all, not bad for a poor girl who wasn't expected by society to amount to much.
Not bad at all. I mean, she is the Italian actress of her era.
Thanks for listening. For more stories of mostly sapphic women of the Belle Epoque, Roaring Twenties, beyond, and before, listen to our episodes and follow us wherever good podcasts are sold. We love your comments on YouTube, and we welcome ideas for who to cover next. And remember, if you're a woman of a certain age, it's not gay if you're postmenopausal.